Good morning and welcome everyone to Getting Deep with Lorian Loc, a new podcast, interview, show thingy I'm doing where we dive deep into whatever we want to. I'm your host Lorian Loc and welcome our first ever guest, Goodrich Games.
Hello, I'm glad to be here. This will be interesting. It's not often people want to talk about a 15 to 20-year-old game. God, I even forgot how long ago Size Matters was.
I want to say 2006, so close to 20 years now, yeah.
All right, well, good. I'm glad they re-released that on the PlayStation Store recently. Give it a
Yeah,
second life.
that brings us perfectly into my starting question. Who the hell are you?
Good question. I ask myself that every day when I wake up.
Hmm.
I am David Goodrich. I have been a game designer for over 20 years, working on everything from mobile to PlayStation to PC, Xbox, um, PSP, obviously, if we're talking about Size Matters. I've also worked for big companies like Activision and Sony, and then a whole bunch of startups that actually got acquired by Activision and Sony. And I've been working on all kinds of games from I think I was most known for was Auto Combat back in the day, the Twisted Metal series, Vigilante 8, and then moving on into Ratchet and Clank, and then True Crime series, and Where's My Water, which was probably the biggest game of them all that no one has ever heard of. That was a mobile Disney game, which I also worked for Disney too back in the day. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell as to who I am.
You've had a lot of things that you've worked on. So I think the best place to start is the beginning. So, how did this sort of adventure into your career begin? Like, did you always know you wanted to be into game demming, designing, or was it thrust upon you, something you just picked up one day and never looked back? Or
Game design was thrust upon me. That sounds that doesn't sound right. No, it was like game design and just game development wasn't really on my radar. It was a pretty new field back when I started, at least here in the U.S. So it wasn't like a job that everybody knew about. You know, you play some games at the arcade or pick up board games at a store, but it wasn't like I want this to be a career. I actually was working at the time at the Pentagon doing classified materials to get certain things funded at Congress level. And my boss at the time, I guess I was doing good at the job. He's like, "Hey, we want to send you to South Korea on the DMZ, but if you accept this assignment, you may have to leave within 30 minutes if things get hot there." And I was just like,
oh,
"Oh no, like this my career is taking a turn for the worse. This doesn't sound like what I signed up for." Um, I can just envision myself like hanging from a helicopter as it's taking off as North Korea is like pouring over the DMZ line. I was just like, this, I'm not going to do this. So a friend of mine who works in films showed me a, you're going to laugh at this,
oh
uh,
boy!
an ad in the back of what was it? Game Informer magazine
Wow. Okay.
for a 3D artist position at a company called Black Ops Entertainment. So I made very good use of the government computers and learned Maya and built out a quick 3D portfolio. um, After work, I promise I wasn't using this on government time, and I got my boss's approval.
Mm.
So I submitted it. They liked my work and flew me out to California, and I've been doing it ever since.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. From almost going to South Korea to game design just like that. Um what would you say it was uh the switch in your job, like working for the government to switch to game design? Like was it literally like in a month you were just like I quit like as soon as you got the approval, or
Yes. Yeah, it was. I got the offer. I gave my notice. They were very sad to see me go. Packed up a U-Haul and drove across country from Virginia to California over the course of like a week, maybe week and a half.
wow, you
They put me up.
drove too?
Yeah, I mean that's game industry was pretty cheap back then. This was not the mega. mega industry we see today, where billions of dollars are being thrown around. We were making games on anywhere from a half a mil to $1 million for an entire game. So they weren't exactly throwing around the bucks to fly people out and move them back then. So everything had to be done. If you wanted to work in the game industry, you really had to kind of do this type of stuff in order to make it work out.
Still, I think very incredible. Like, 20 years ago, it's not that long ago to see how different the industry has changed.
Oh yeah, I almost do not recognize it at this point. It has
Hmm.
changed so much, especially after COVID. It has gone into interesting territory, which I'm sure we might dive into later on here. It's kind of funny that some of my first jobs were doing auto combat, and one of the projects I was working at the Pentagon was for the Humvee, which then ended up being used in all the auto combat games after that, and like the Twisted Metals for the next couple of decades. So it was like a precursor to what I would be getting into.
That's actually kind of incredible that you worked with the Humvee. That's I feel like that's such an iconic military vehicle, especially in gaming. So it's fitting, I guess.
Yeah, I never thought it would become a regular car on the streets. So I also feel bad about that at times. So
Hmm.
take that, environment.
Would you do the same if you could do it again? So if you had a new lease on your life, sort of going into military, learning that software, going into game demming, would you do it again the exact same way, or would you change anything?
Yeah, this is such a hard question. This is a curveball. Um, Game development is not for the weak, and I know that sounds like I'm kind of being facetious there, but it is. It's long hours and weekends. It's 7 days a week for a year straight, and a lot of people can get burned out. And I always joke about this, where I say the game industry has probably made more alcoholics than games, uh, because it is such a very stressful job. But you know, I love creating stuff, and I love seeing my ideas come to life and work within a game system, and people enjoying that. Like that is like a high that you won't get at a lot of different jobs. So
Hmm.
it's, do I want to go through the grind, and do I think I could go through the grind again? I don't know, man. It gets pretty tough.
Hmm.
The older you get, the harder it gets to stay in the game industry. And I think one of the last stats I saw is the average lifespan, and not as you're going to die, but the lifespan of your career in the game industry is 6 years. That's
Wow.
um, that's pretty short, and it's not like an NBA career where you're 6 years you walk out a multimillionaire. You walk out maybe with a pink slip at the end of that time. So
Yikes. Yeah.
it's a little rough, but I have been blessed and fortunate enough to make really good stuff and still keep going in the game career, or in my career in games. And it's not all sunshine. Like, I've been laid off
Hmm.
at least yeah, 5 times, and four of them were from studio closures. The studio just game studios back in the day were great at making really fun games. They're terrible at managing money, so they would almost always go under.
Hmm.
So it like I said, it's not an easy career. It's not a 9 to 5 that you're going to stay in for 10, 15, 20 years and be stable, and then just retire with a pension or anything like that. That's not games. It's a gig economy.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you live and die by the last game you made. And I've been fortunate to kind of keep going all these years, but I also think it's because I love it and I'm passionate about it, and it's a great job overall.
It sounds similar to a lot of other artistic sort of fields that I have experience with and have heard about. So it's interesting because I feel like a lot of people don't, I guess, associate game deving with being like super giggy or being like a real artist jobs. But from what your experience, it sounds like it really is.
It is. But what other jobs have you done? Let me flip the interview for a second.
Oh, yeah. So, after college, I went to acting school and I was acting in New York. God, I guess from like 2017 until 2020. when the COVID happened. I've learned about different types of actors on stage, on screen, artists, 2D artists, digital artists, 3D artists, and just met a whole bunch of different, I guess for lack of a better word, people in arts fields, fields where it's all about the passion. You could work your hardest and be the best in your field, but because of like unlucky circumstance, you're not really making that much money and going from gig to gig looking for like a big break. And I think streaming is even similar to that as well, as I've talked to streaming and met people from streaming and then from their game deving. I think it's really interesting and cool to see artists and how all these jobs are like really the same, because I think before I had that personal experience with these people, I wouldn't have necessarily put like a classical painting artist and an actor and a streamer in the same sort of boat, or a game dev.
Yeah, they probably have very similar trajectories. That early game dev, and even still to today, there's passion will be exploited, and unfortunately,
Mm,
passion is what it needs to make it in this industry. I've heard many a higher up at a place like Activision say, if you don't want to stay the 80 hours this week, I can go over to the Art Institute across the street and find somebody who will. And you would hear things like that all the
mm.
time throughout my career in the game industry. So people would get in there and just get it done. And those are the people who survive in the game industry the longest, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Also the ones who kind of take that shit.
Except for the exploitive part, which is obviously sucks. I think it's like kind of beautiful that an artist will, because they're passionate about something, work 80 hours that they really shouldn't a week and get something done.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like a lot of systems in the past or mechanics that I really believed in, I would stay late on my own to get it done and polish it up and make it feel good because
Hmm.
my name was going on this thing. This was my
Ooh.
work. This is going to represent me for the next few years in the game industry. So I was happy to do that. But then there's definitely a difference where there's a difference between you wanting to do it and you're being forced to do it. And the forced part is part of the abusive angle that used to at least happen in the game industry. I think it's eased up a little bit since COVID.
Hmm.
With so many people working remotely, it's hard for bosses to crack down in those type of circumstances.
That leads beautifully into my next question. I see you have credits as an artist and a lead designer on different games. So, how are your experiences being a designer versus being an artist, and the differences between the two, and if you have any preference?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so that job from the Pentagon where I was doing all the art, I came out to purely be an artist in the game industry. And as I was working at this company and doing art for them and creating levels, uh, I noticed that there was really nobody doing design. Design wasn't even a position back then.
Hmm.
Design was done by committee by the entire company or the bosses. It was kind of like a side thing. So all the focus was just mainly on art and programming, and then people would just put things together as much as they made sense. But there was no like real documentation around it or real theories or practices. I mean, game design schools didn't even exist back then. So I noticed this need and started to put together documentation, put together like JSON charts and Excel sheets of like, here's all the enemy hit points, here's all the damage of all these weapons, and kind of collecting that there while doing level design. So I was kind of creating a new role there at the time. And from my understanding with talking to people at Sony, the same thing was kind of happening over there with like the Twisted Metal team and stuff. So it was kind of funny how all this kind of organically formed into new positions, which I guess makes sense. As a industry matures, you're going to figure out new optimal ways of doing things and roles
Hmm.
to cover those things. So I was mainly an artist, kind of fell into design just because I saw a need for it. And then when I moved on to Luxoflux to work on Vigilante 8, kind of the same thing happened. They hired me on as a contract artist, but it turned out I was really good at design. So they basically, and to their credit, and I always loved them for this, basically said, here, do whatever you want, just run it past us real quick, and then we'll give it our blessing or say no, or it's too technically difficult, and then we'll move forward with it. And for the most part, they took like all my combat designs, combo designs, a lot of the damage and environmental stuff, and after that, because I was doing those two roles, they just kind of eased me into a full-time design position, and then it was design ever since then. So, but occasionally on some of the smaller PS1 projects, whenever there was a need, like we had brought in a bunch of new artists who didn't know how to do, LODs or optimize art for PS1 and stuff like that, I would reassume the art role and kind of give them guidelines and build out some stuff as examples for them. And I did a lot of that on a game called Twisted Metal Small Brawl, where I was lead designer and art director on that. But since then, I'm just all design. I've just moved into that. I didn't keep up with all the art packages that you need to be a professional artist these
Mm.
days, because there's a lot. You gotta learn Maya and Photoshop and Adobe Premiere, depending on what you're doing, or Flash, or it's called Adobe Animate now. And there's just a million Substance Painters and all these new tech that's coming out every single every single month, it seems. And now with AI, it's just accelerating. You can just tell AI, hey, make me this beautiful image of a cat riding a motorcycle, and it'll do it. So I'm kind of
Mm.
glad I didn't go into art. um, AI is not going to fully replace it, but it's definitely taking a chunk out of artist positions in the game industry right now. As far as like design, AI can't quite do what we're doing. So my preference at the moment, because I didn't keep up with art, and AI is kind of causing problems for artists in game design, or sorry, in art. I'm kind of glad I'm still on the game design track at the moment.
Um,
Should I be offended I didn't get the full poly model? Am I not worth the extra polys?
no, it's because we're doing about 20-year-old games. So I was supposed to be like, if you're on a project, like, do you get hired? Well, you actually, I guess you answered. You got hired as an artist on a project, and then sometimes you elevated to manager. I mean, designer. So I think that's
Yeah.
answered.
Oh, I mean, my career path was really unusual. Most people in games will start off as play testers, and God help their souls. That is one of the shittiest jobs in the game industry, but you're paying your dues.
Mm.
But I mean, as far as like how it's decided, you generally come into that company as a fully trained artist or a designer. Like you don't walk in and they just assign roles like they're assigning seats in a class. You know it's a serious job where you have to have a good portfolio. You got to prove you can do the work. You probably do some kind of design test
Mm.
or art test. They check your references, make sure you're a good culture fit for the company and that you know the product. And then if you are the best person for the job, then you generally get that job if you're an artist or a designer. But it is very odd for someone to jump around between the two like I did. And I think the only reason I did it is a I was pretty good at both, but the industry was so small, and the small startup teams I was working at, you have to wear a lot of hats.
Mm.
So I kind of on the job training, let's say trial by fire, being able to do that. But that generally doesn't happen anymore. Especially the bigger the company you're at, the more focused your role is going to be.
Mm.
So I always this is kind of a segue here, but I always joke about I when my students come up to me and they ask me like, "Hey, how do I get into Blizzard and be like the lead designer or be the art director?" And I'll say, "You don't.
Mm.
You're going to work at 5 different crappy little companies doing your first game's probably going to be Barbie's dress up time, and you're going to be in charge of pants. That's all you get to do. You get to design pants for this game. And if you do good, then maybe you'll get another job at another company, working on, I don't know, horses or something. Like, what does this horse look like? What does this horse? How does it run? Things like that. And if you get enough of a portfolio that Blizzard notices you, when you start there, you're not going to be the lead artist. You're going to be rock guy. You're going to be making rocks all day, every day, and placing them in the different environments, and that's going to be your job. And if you're really, really good at that, and you really impress your boss, then you can move up to tree guy, and then you can get to make trees and place trees around the environment for the next 2 years. And then once you've proven yourself to them that you're reliable and you can do a good job, then you start moving up through the ranks into positions that you really want. But you're not going to start in the industry as a lead on your dream project. You're going to have to work on projects you do not like just to prove you can do it, because some of those positions that you want, they don't open up for years. So what are you going to do? Sit around without a job for years? You got to do something to get in the industry and get noticed.
Real corporate ladder type stuff.
It is corporate ladder. You don't want to let the wrong people into games. And by wrong, I mean very inexperienced, or people who
Of
don't know the
course.
product or what the audience is. During the pandemic, because games were taking off and we were just trying to fill as many seats as possible, we brought in a lot of people who were not cut out for the game industry, did not understand the kind of hours they'd have to work, that it was a gig industry, things like that. And then as a result, you got things like Concord and Dustborn rolling out.
Hmm.
So, and the industry is in rough shape right now. We have lost between um, 2002 to now about 35,000 jobs have been
Hmm.
layoffs, and then studios are shutting down left and right. Concord, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but
Yeah.
8 years to make that thing $200 million, and they shut it down in 2 weeks.
Less than 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, and then another one was Visions of Mana, a Japanese company, just released their game, and a day later they shut down the entire studio. Like
Wow.
we're in dire straits at the moment as far as like the game industry, and that's because we grew too quickly, we spent too much money and too much time, so games had to make immediate bank, or you were screwed. And then bringing in a bunch of people who didn't understand it's a gig economy, and there's going to be a lot of work to do and a lot of overtime. I think really hurt everything and kind of pushed out the timelines from what a normal game should be, from like these days 2 to 3 years to 8 years of project. That's insane.
Yeah.
That's
That's an era in someone's life to dedicate to a single artistic
it,
project that might suck.
yeah, and 8 years, the gaming industry is going to the trends are going to change. You're going to be
Hmm.
so out of date. I mean, we got even cranking out a game every 2 years. If you didn't hit if you didn't get it out in time before the next console came out, your game looked dated,
Hmm.
and that was just like graphics. Do that by 8 years now, and it's going to be exponentially worse.
So to my understanding, the more recent layoffs of these big companies, massive layoffs, was due to the overhiring in 2020 due to the pandemic and them like sort of scrambling to fill things. As far as I understand, would
Mhm.
you agree with that? Or since you said since 2002, is it a more systemic issue of like you said, over bloated budget and growth too fast?
It was a perfect storm. It was pandemic making it look like the game industry was way more profitable than it was in the long term.
Mm.
Yeah, when everybody's locked inside and playing games and just buying tons of games and consoles with their stimulus checks. Yeah, it's gonna look like this thing's going through the roof. And if you think about it, all these other industries are starting to collapse out there. So investors who were never really part of games saw that this is the one industry that's taking off. So they came in, they threw a lot of money in, but if you take money from these investors, they expect a return, and a big one.
Mm.
And as soon as the pandemic ended and people started to go out and touch grass, and all those sales started to fall off, a good example was the Microsoft acquisition of Activision. They they bought them basically on the pandemic numbers, and by the time that sale went through, they suddenly got the data afterwards of like, oh no, all these sales are dropping off. And then next thing you know, there's a ton of layoffs, and studio shutdowns by Microsoft over there. So they got left holding the bag. They were going off old data, and they kind of got screwed by it.
Mm.
So yeah, it was pandemic, new investor types who had some pretty aggressive goals as far as making their money back, that were flooding into the games industry because it was one of the only profitable things right now. I mean, even like the movies, they got hit hard.
Yeah.
Streaming got streaming kind of took off for Netflix, but movie theaters and all that stuff, even that form of entertainment was just done. So they got in trouble. So when investors see games and how well they are doing, they're going to come over and they're going to change that market quite a bit. And then because we were staffing up so much, we did bring in a lot of people who did not have the skills or the insights to make the games to the level of quality that we used to before the pandemic, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Because not everybody wants to be a game designer. Not everybody has trained up for to be, a game developer. So they were pulling a lot of people from tech and other areas that had never made games before, and it was a shocker to them when they got into the industry. Just like, what? I have to work these hours? What? The game didn't sell and we don't have a job anymore? Like it was a bit of a gotcha for them. I feel bad for them.
So this is a perfect segue talking about how bad the game industry is. What kind of advice would you give people who want to do what you do? Skills, education, how to break in, what to do, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make it seem like the game industry is bad. Some of the conditions are, and it's in bad shape at the moment. But I mean, for anybody who like wants to get into the game industry, I would say there's a lot of resources out there. You can look on YouTube. There's a lot of articles you can search and get a pretty comprehensive, education light to learn how to do certain. And there's a lot of free resources you can get to actually make stuff with. Unity is free as long as you're not selling something like 100,000 units. You can get packages like GIMP, which is like a Photoshop, free Photoshop, or Blender, which is a free 3D modeling program. And if you're really serious about it, you could go take a course at a college. A lot of them are getting game design and game development programs in the works. And I've taught at a couple of them over the last 10 years, and it's a good gateway into the game industry. That's one of the things you can do to kind of break in or get a feel for what it is. I think AAA and big studios are going to be a little rough for a few years. So one thing I always tell my students is, A, always have a backup plan because you're not going to be in the game industry forever. And B, if your passion is just to make one or two games that you've always dreamed about, get a regular 9 to 5 job and then do this on the side as an indie. And I know people who do that and do it rather successfully. They make these little games, these little experiences, and then they just throw them up on the Steam store, and then they've got a few games under their under their belt, and they can even use these as to go into an interview and show examples of their work. So these are some of the best ways to get into the game industry currently. Hopefully AAA stabilizes again in about another 5 to 6 years. I think it's going to take before we stabilize, everything shakes out, and then they start ramping back up to decent levels where they're hiring people again. But as I mentioned, my earlier unhinged rant, where we have a lot of layoffs going on right now, so it's tough out there to get a professional gig. But that shouldn't stop you, if you really want to do this, from setting up in your spare time and making this a hobby where you can actually create something cool and put it up on a platform like Steam and show off your work. But bear in mind, side projects, and I've done them, they take about 4 times longer than they would if you were doing this full time every day. So you're talking a year project's probably going to be about 4 years. If you guys are familiar with the game Cuphead, I think that guy self-funded his game over the course of like 10 years and released that. Thank God it was a hit. Otherwise, he probably would have lost his house and everything. But he did it. Like, he had passion for it, and he released something that was really good. So there's room for indies out there, but don't expect a big hit. It takes a few games before you can make something that really gets traction, because like anything, you need practice at it.
That was a fantastic answer. I love that. To just shout out one of my friends, because it's related. For anyone watching, like, if you listen to that and you were just like, oh, I can't do it, I don't have time, blah blah blah, I have a friend, Duper 3D. who literally is also a father, and he streams and he works a full time job, and he still is working on his game Toasty Ashes of Dark. And even if you work on it 5 minutes a day or an hour a weekend, it's something. It's art that you're working on, and if it makes you happy, I think you should do it.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good creative outlet. Those are some of my favorite hobbies, are ones that could actually turn into something that could be a good piece of art or make money, kind of
Yeah.
like streaming. Mm.
So you answered this a little bit before, but what are some of the early stuff you worked on leading up to Ratchet and Clank Size Matters?
Leading up to Size Matters, I was one of the four guys who made the Vigilante 8 series, which was kind of a competitor to Twisted Metal. So much so that the Twisted Metal guys got worried and then hired me away from Luxoflux to kill the franchise. Um, Fortunately, the joke was on them. We weren't going to make another auto combat, and I wanted to, so I just went over there and then worked on Twisted Metal series, Twisted Metal Small Brawl, Twisted Metal Black Online, and then also I think those pretty much. Oh, True Crime series, and then from there I moved into Ratchet and Clank Matters, and then Secret Agent Clank and Jack and Daxter: The Last Frontier were our first three PSP games.
Amazing. So, of all those projects you worked on before Size Matters, which one was your favorite?
Jeez, it's got to be Vigilante 8. It's
Mm.
an impressive thing to make a PS1 game, even though it was early days with like 4.5 people, and have it still sell like 1.3 million units worldwide. Like that's a major accomplishment. If you want to talk about a profitable game, that would be it. Having such a small team and getting such a
Mm.
wide release, and it's still known to this day. There's a bunch of communities out there still playing it and streaming it. One guy, even a guy from Russia, went in and remodded the game so it can be played on Unity with up to 16 players online. And then
Wow.
I chatted with him and gave him a bunch of notes, and then he actually incorporated a lot of the fixes that we didn't have time to get in there.
Oh,
So that's pretty cool. Like that's dedication right there.
that has got to feel incredible that someone went back to something you made 20 years ago and it's just like breathed new life into it, I feel.
Yeah, and I stream that one often now, and I play with some of the guys, which all these dudes are half my age and they're just eating me alive. But it's still a good time. Occasionally, I get them.
How did you guys sort of acquire the license or contract to do a Ratchet and Clank game? Like, how did that go about? Of
Yeah, this was a bit before my time. So, from what I have heard, and take this with a grain of salt, because a game of telephone is never 100% accurate. But what I heard from my bosses and what I remember is Insomniac was approached to do a Ratchet and Clank PSP version, and Insomniac said no. It
mm,
was a new platform. They were established on the PlayStation. They were making gobs of money over there. They weren't going to pivot all their resources onto a smaller platform that probably wasn't going to be very profitable. We got like I think five of the Insomniacs to come over and help found High Impact Games. I joined probably a third of the way through on production for that game, so I wasn't privy to all the details.
were you a fan of Ratchet and Clank before this? Had you heard of it? Were you excited that you got to work on a Ratchet and Clank game?
Yeah, I really like Ratchet and Clank. Um, Played 1 through 3, and then I actually studied up on Deadlock to try to get a job over at Insomniac myself. The first game in the industry I worked at was with a bunch of guys who ended up at Insomniac, including Dan Johnson, my friend Matt, who was lead programmer on Spyro 1 and 2, and then I think also on Ratchet 1. So and then I knew Ted Price and Brian Algier and a few others over there in passing. So I was familiar with the game, played it quite a bit, tried to get over at Insomniac. Unfortunately, I think I borked the test, which sometimes happens, and I ended up at High Impact instead as a result of it. But yeah, I mean, Ratchet and Clank series was fantastic, especially number 3 was so well polished, and it was just
Mm, mm.
such a good experience.
Was it an interview that you botched? I'm curious about this botched Insomniac interview.
Yeah, it was an interview. They did a design test, and I think I did something that was against their core tenets on one of my level designs, and they were just like,
Mm.
"Nah, thanks. Like, we don't
Oof.
place robots in this off to the side on the left." I don't know. I don't remember the exact feedback of it, but it was not exactly what they were looking for. It was close. I was second runner up for that, but I did not
Oh.
make it. And my one of my friends said, "Yeah, it was down to these three guys, and but this big Viking dude didn't get it." And I was like, "Huh?" And I was just like, I found out that they referred to me as the Viking dude because I was a big beefy dude and I had long hair at the time, and I looked like a Ragnar Viking back in the days.
I don't. That's not a bad descriptor. I don't think.
That's right. And now I'm gonna spill all your dirt on an interview 20 years later. Take that. My revenge plans are long, long and complicated.
Oh yeah, this is the full expose. Insomniac, your days are numbered.
Kind of the tying back into that, because I was really good friends with a lot of the Spyro guys. They gave me two signed discs of Spyro 1 and 2 by the team, including I think Dan's signature on there, and it might be the only one of its kind. So I'll send that image over to you if you want to show it in the video.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah. Future Lori, show that in the video right now. So, since this interview is mostly centered around size matters, or that was the intention, what work did you do on size matters?
Size matters. They wanted to leverage some features in the PSP, including being able to play multiplayer locally between PSPs. So they decided to add multiplayer to the game. So I interviewed over there, did really well considering I practiced quite a bit for my Insomniac interview. So I was able to nail the high impact one pretty easily. So I came on board and did all of the multiplayer maps for them. Managed to wrap it up pretty quickly, and then they started giving me different assignments to do, such as the Mungo Boss. I ended up doing that. I ended up doing all the weapon upgrades and then the mods you could buy. Taking all my design expertise from like Car Combat Days and Vigilante 8 and things like that, which seemed to fit rather well into it. And then I did all the basic armor abilities. So when you get a full set, those armor abilities I created those, except for the first one. The Wildfire was already done. So came up with ideas for those, and then kind of a funny story. One of the programmers there, as we were putting all this together, every time we got to like a better piece of equipment, and you put it on like a helmet because you wanted the better armor, it would stop the base armor ability. So he's just like, we need to solve this. So he went off and threw together a list of combinations of different armors. And he brought it back and we chatted about it. I was like, I'm not your boss, but if you want to do this, go ahead. Like it really closes the game design loop, because yeah, this kills the abilities. Like you're stuck with one set, the entire time until you get a full another set. And that was not good gameplay.
Mm.
So apparently the story is, and I forget how many days it was, but I think he stayed 3 days straight at the office coding all this out to make all the armor sets, and like sleeping under his
Wow.
desk. And then the boss found out about it and was so mad and basically said, "You need to go home now." Like, you're out of here. But the mix and match set got in, and he's a really good programmer, and one of the rare ones who's like a good programmer and
Mm.
designer with design sense. And he's over at Riot now. He's a neat dude. I like him.
Oh,
He's over there
nice.
making toxic gameplay at Riot.
Let's go. It's fun. I actually got invited to play League of Legends. I had to turn them down because I'm doing this interview, so that's kind of funny. You saved me a League of Legends game.
I haven't played that in so long. I was actually approached by them way back in the day. But Caldfield, I think his name was Tom Caldfield. He was like the head of design over there, and they approached me and saw my work on a bunch of different combat games. And he's like, "Hey, we'd like you to interview." And I interviewed. I did pretty well. He then sent me a design test. I was in Texas at the time working on Pirates 101, which was like a shoot off of Wizards 101.
Mm.
And I did the design test and designed a bunch of champions for him and sent it. Didn't hear anything for like 3 months. And another job opportunity came up, and I took that and moved back to LA. And then like about the fourth month, I get an email from him going, "Hey, did you ever do that design test?" And I was just like, table flip. It was like, yes,
Oh.
yes, I did. You didn't check your damn email, dude. And
Ugh.
I had some cool stuff in there. I had like a mermaid character who could um, teleport anywhere up and down the main river in the center of the map, um, or do very short ones outside of it. So she'd have
Hmm.
a lot of mobility, but only in certain areas. And then the ability to like soak people, and then if they were soaked, she could shock them for extra damage or create chain lightning between multiple people she had soaked. It's really cool stuff. I think I think that does not matter now, though.
I mean, it's interesting. Does anything matter? I mean, it's great to hear from designers at the time, like what they were thinking in terms of game design and like another angle of Riot. I don't think anyone's heard before, so I think that's really cool.
But as far as like things on Ratchet and Clank, I think, oh, I did all the Clank challenges too. Not the dreaded hoverboard challenges, but the Clank ones.
Mm.
So Sony back in the day, if you had a physical copy of a game, Activision, Sony, everybody wanted to be able to put somewhere on there over 80 hours of gameplay. Then that was like a huge selling point back then. So if they played through your game and it was not the right amount of hours that they wanted, they would then come to you and be like, "Hey, can you throw together a bunch of mini games in like 2 months before we ship, just to pad out
Ooh.
pad out the playtime?" And that like happened on V8 and Twisted Metal, and then this, um, on Size Matters. So we ended up just grabbing all the extra resources we hadn't used or existing resources and just cramming everything together at the last second to get these really crappy mini games to pad out the playtime, like the hoverboard, like actually the Little Lemmings game was I think was already planned. It was probably one of the more solid ones, but the
Mm.
Clank challenges where he's throwing little gadget bots and driving around little vehicles, like we scrambled and just threw that together and just had no time to even tune or readjust or put that through the iterative loop.
Based on the placement of replaying that game, I can kind of feel it. I could see it. I don't think those were bad. It definitely pads the playtime. I had fun with them, but yeah, they did seem a little. This is randomly here. This is randomly here. Time for more Clank stuff.
Yeah, that's it. Definitely. I mean, the game did really well. I forget what we did, but we did stupid numbers on this thing. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. It was over 1 million units for the PlayStation, or for the PSP,
Wow.
which is disgusting when the game was what, 30-40 bucks. So a PSP game made 30 to 40 million dollars depending on how much it was going for at the time.
Yeah, that's
That's
pretty good.
Where did all that money go? It certainly didn't go into our paychecks. Huh. I call embezzlement. But yeah, no, it was a big success. It was for what it was. I think
Was there anything Sony or Insomniac said you couldn't do? Whether this was at the get go or you submitted something and they were just like, "No, we can't do this."
interesting. Not on Size Matters, but for Secret Agent Clank, um, I was the lead designer on that and kind of directing the entire project. I decided to have a naked scene with Ratchet in the in the prison shower room. Three words that should never go together. But he would run around in a towel, and if he took enough damage, the towel would drop off, and there was nothing underneath. Literally, he's smooth like a Ken doll. And I thought this was fine. Sony did not think this was fine. They said, we never show Ratchet naked. So we already built all this out, and I thought it was such funny gameplay and just kind of on the edge, a little bit edgy, a little bit adult humor, and I wanted to keep it. So I negotiated with them, and had a compromise with him. So now when he loses the towel, there's a black sensor bar that appears there instead as he's running around until he gets enough health for the towel to reappear. And it's the same with all the enemies too. It's hilarious to see them just
Oh,
running
just a
around with
whole
sensor bars.
tower fight. I mean, tower shower fight.
Yeah, it was good times. I will be happy when you play that section. I'll be curious to see your reaction.
Yeah, it's gonna be. I feel a little bad, chat, for transparency. I didn't finish Secret Agent Clank before this interview, but it's fine. I finished it when I was younger, so I kind of know the stuff that happens. But it's really surprising that I guess that's the only thing they were just like straight up no on. Like that was the red flag.
Yeah,
That's kind of cool. They were more open, or I guess you guys were more in line with what they envisioned.
yeah. I mean, I think Sony mainly gives story notes. Insomniac wasn't in the process at all. Like, I don't think they gave us really any guidance. It was just purely with Sony. Um, and then Sony got some assets from them that we ended up using for like the dream level, a lot of flat card assets and things like that. But overall, not much input from Insomniac, but Sony would definitely give input a little bit here and there. And that was one of the big funny ones that I still managed to get in there that I'm happy about.
So the dream sequence in Size Matters, you were in charge of that as well, right?
Yeah, that was one of the levels I did. What do you want to know about it?
Personally, I think that the dream sequence is one of the most unique thing in the entire series, let alone that game. So I really want to know what was sort of the inspiration and process of coming up and designing that whole sort of level.
Yeah, that was so we'd written out the entire story of it, and then you kind of craft the levels around it in sequence as to what's happening in the game. This was actually my boss's level, but she got tied up with running the company. I mean, slacker. So she handed the level off to me, and I quickly threw together the dream sequence. A bunch of other people helped too with some ideas of like, hey, we could have flat cards of these characters floating around and everything. It felt like a normal level at first, but some of our programmers were really good at creating shaders and particle effects. That was actually one of the reasons why we ended up getting the contract with Sony, is because the Insom guys that came over along with some engineers that they knew built out just these massive particle effect systems, and they could push more particles than Sony had ever seen on the PSP. And Sony likes games that show off the technology and what it can push, more so sometimes than the games themselves back then. It's not the case now.
Hmm.
I mean, you have to make money, but back then when they had deep pockets, they're just like, yeah, this game's not the best thing, but my God, does it look good and does it make our system look good? So they would greenlight some of these things. So, long story short, oh my gosh, every time I bump this table, it does a green flash. I got to not touch it. Long story short, one of the programmers threw together this kind of dreamy, oil smeary effect in there to make it feel like Ratchet was having a drug-induced dream, which is pretty much what it was, since he was sedated during this entire level, and he's picking up money and armor and killing enemies in his sleep. But yeah, that was the whole impetus of this level, was that we had a section where he's been put under, he's getting DNA drawn, and we're going to have gameplay in kind of this fever dream of his using some very I will say for the time advanced filters that kind of add that dreamy effect to the edges, even though it's very distracting and makes gameplay super hard. I wish we could have turned it down in hindsight.
I mean, I think it was cool, but I can see what you mean. Wow, that's really cool. I think the your statement about how Insomniac used to, if something was pretty, they would just put it in, is kind of cool, because I remember when Tools of Destruction first came out and they jumped to the PS3, a lot of the reviews were sort of like, this is a Pixar movie in video game form, and even to Rift Apart, which came out, not that they focus on graphics, but I do feel like graphically looking like a Pixar movie in quotation marks is kind of part of Ratchet and Clank's identity nowadays. So it's really interesting to hear that back in like 2006 that was something they were interested in pushing, things that looked really cool with the technology on the PSP.
Yeah, so Sony really wanted stuff to look good. Insomniac's always been a gameplay first company, which I think is great. Because if it looks good and plays like crap, no one's going to really remember it years later. But all the Insomniac games play so well and look good
Mm.
that this is why it's just embedded in the culture of gaming, and everybody remembers these games so fondly.
I like this question. I'm going to let you go off with this one. But last time we spoke, you seemed very passionate about the multiplayer that you headed for Ratchet and Clank Size Matters. So I would like you to just tell me and gush about that as much as you'd like to.
All right, gush, I will. So yeah, so the multiplayer maps, I didn't have a lot of resources. This was kind of like a Vigilante 8 type situation. There was three of us making this, and we basically took all the resources that were already in the game, like the weapons, the characters, environmental set pieces, and hobbled these levels together. We had to make a few new things, obviously. It wasn't all from scratch, but the bulk of it was pulling out pieces that work for multiplayer and making it work. And initially, I think we are planning something like 6v6, but the programmer we had hired to do this didn't was pretty new at the job
Hmm.
and didn't understand network coding, and then it went from like 6v6 to 4v4 to 3v3, and then it ended up as 2v2 unfortunately. But in the end, that might have been helpful, because I can't imagine like 12 people running to each other on the street or sitting on a bus who have PlayStations and this game and are playing multiplayer at the same time. We probably never would have hit those numbers in a million years. But yeah, the multiplayer was pretty good. We had a lot of firsts in that, including not just deathmatch, but we added new modes like we called them Iron Lombacks, where players could do different objectives and still win the game. So one of the levels is you have to run around and pick up fuel cells around the environment and get them back to your ship to fuel it so you can take off before the other team does. But if you carry a fuel cell for too long, the radiation mutates you into a little green mungo, and then you die, and then someone else can run over and try to get it. And this is kind of a funny story. One of the one of the animators who worked there, really talented guy. English was not his first language, and there was a bit of a language barrier there. So originally, we were going to have Mungo the boss blow up when you kill him, and someone asked him to make an animation of Mungo blowing up, and he made an animation of Mungo blowing up like a balloon and then floating off into the sky. And so that was cut, because that's not the way that's not the way Mungo's supposed to die in the game. So when I was making the multiplayer version of this, you could kill the little radioactive Mungos, except for the mutator. And I was like, what can we do with the mutator that would affect the little Mungo? So I found this animation. I'm just like, this is it. So if you manage to cook Mungo enough with the mutator, he just inflates into a balloon and just rises up into the sky, and that's the end of him. So I was using every scrap that we were throwing away during development. And if you make game dev enough and you got a scattered enough team, a lot of little pieces don't get used, and they just get thrown aside. But I was just grabbing everything and doing that. So so you got to get the fuel cells back. You got to get 3 of them. People can kill you and steal them. Then you can get once everybody's back to the ship, it just takes off, which I think is probably one of the first extraction shooters in games, even though it's very crude and rudimentary. But that was a pretty neat first, I think, for that. We had another one where you had to strap on a homing beacon and then run around and pick up hover mines that would chase you and then run them back to the enemy's base and try to blow up their base. And that was a lot of fun. gameplay, and you can shoot people before they made it to your base, and then grab that homing beacon and run it back to their base. So there was a lot of fun back and forth there. One of my favorite ones was there's a level called Mad Cow Disease, and it is your job to run around with a suck cannon and suck up cows on this farm level, and then you shoot them into a meat grinder, and it gives you a crate of cow meat, and then you got to pick that up with the little magnet and run it over to a pickup truck, and once you get 3 on there, it takes off, and then you win the match. So you got to load up these crates onto the meat trucks to get them out in time. But if you can't find a cow, you can use a mutator, turn someone else into a cow, fire them into the meat grinder to make a meat crate, and then load up a truck and still win that way if you want. So it's a little bit of a sick humor, but I enjoy that at times. And then we had other standard modes like just regular deathmatch, capture the flag in there. Gosh, what was the 4th map in there? We had 4 size matters maps. Why can I not think of this? Let me look it up real quick. And while I'm looking that up, we also had a 5th map, which is going to be the spaceship graveyard. Ooh. And that ended up getting cut, and I ended up reusing that for Secret Agent Clank, for one of the Quark levels that he runs around fighting a giant kudzu. Multiplayer map. Let's see. I cannot believe I can't remember this. I'm getting old, man. Yeah. Memory's going. Next will be the eyesight. Oh, that's right. We also had a Dan skin for the multiplayer. Mega Cannons was the other one. So Mega Cannons was really cool. You had 2 cannons in the opposing bases, and you had to run around and pick up cogs using the magnet device, and then slap them onto the cannon. And once you got 3 on, the cannon was operational, but then you had to run around on these grind rails to a power place, and then you crank that bolt, and then it starts feeding power into the cannon. Once the cannon hits full strength, you can then fire it either at the opponent players running around or blow up their cannon in order to win that match. So we wanted to try really new, interesting things outside of just a death match and just running around and doing capture the flag, stuff that's been seen a million times before. And then I also wanted to add some interesting features in there, like if you are currently winning a match in deathmatch, a crown appears above your head. And I know that sounds pretty standard, but I think that was the first time we've done that in games. And then I kind of riffed off of that. And if somebody kills you a lot in the multiplayer mode, you will see devil horns above their head. We called that Nemesis mode, which might have been the first, though very, very crude Nemesis mode also in games. So we did a lot of experimentation, came up with a lot of interesting things for the game itself, which, I was pretty proud of. It's, again, a 3-man team just killing it and getting the gameplay done. And it turned out really well. It's really well received. And kind of like V8, there is a Size Matters community that figured out how to reverse engineer the multiplayer, and they play every Saturday now. And they do deathmatch and capture the flag and the modes. And I joined them last 2 weeks ago, and I may do it again. And that's a lot of fun. And they're trying to grow their community too.
That does.
I shared a video with them. You were watching. You're like, dang, these guys can play.
Yeah, that does sound like a lot of fun. I might look into Saturday nights in Ratchet Size Matter myself. So anyone here, actually, if anyone listening wants to join in the community, do you have where they could go to look more into that?
I'll have to send that to you. I don't have it offhand.
All right, Future Lori will put that in the video, and hopefully remember to put it in the description.
You don't have to plug them. They're a side group. I'm happy to plug them, but I don't want them to cannibalize, or whatever you guys call it, self-promote.
No. I mean, if people that stumble upon this video, obviously are interested in Size Matters and they want to join a community and play the multiplayer game, I'm fine with doing that. That sounds like a lot of fun. All right. I think the crude humor that you mentioned, that's sort of sort of is sprinkled or is themed around these multiplayer methods you work on, I think is actually very fitting for at least the earlier games of Ratchet and Clank, that sort of had things to say about big business and capitalism and stuff like that. So I think it's taking cows to the meat grinder to get them, I feel like it's very fitting for the universe, honestly.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun with it. I also carried that humor into Secret Agent Clank with the Porkinator, I think it is, or pork chop gun,
Yeah.
where if you fully upgrade it and you turn someone into a pig, then they turn into a pork chop you can eat for health as you run past them. So you're cannibalizing the other prison inmates as you're fighting them. As you do in prison.
Yeah,
Not that I would
classic.
know anything.
I've never played the multiplayer, but honestly, it does sound really awesome. So I want to ask your opinion. In a world where the Spider-Man multiplayer game and the Last of Us multiplayer game were canceled, do you think if this Ratchet and Clank multiplayer was released with like a modern Ratchet and Clank game, that it would do well or be received or get a lot of players?
That's a tough question. You're asking me to look into the future. I can give you my
Mm-mm.
best educated guess. Um, it would have to be small scope. They would not have to break the bank on a million cinematics and doing too much with the game itself. If it's a small, fun little experience, probably in the vein of like Deadlock, I think it would do okay. I think it would it be a runaway hit. I don't know. There's so many shooters out there that specialize in this kind of stuff, like a Fortnite, and
Mm-hmm.
Overwatch. I'll even throw them in there. That this is their bread and butter. That it's really hard to compete with that purely on a multiplayer basis. But if it's released with like a regular Ratchet game, and they just don't go too ham on it, yeah, I think it'll do all right. It's not going to be a major blockbuster. In other words, the lesson is don't spend too much on stuff. Just make it cheap and good if you can. These days, that is.
Personally, Sony, if you're watching, I think would be a unique PvP experience to bring to PlayStation, surely on one of their biggest IPs. I think Ratchet and Clank's one of their biggest IPs, I want to say. Um but moving on, the treehouse in size matters. Very similar to an Insomniac museum. It has a lot of cut content and cool behind the scenes. Is there anything like the towel dropping from Ratchet that was cut from the cut content that didn't make it into the treehouse?
Boy, I wish I had a great answer for you on this. Everything that got cut is in the treehouse. Like
Hmm.
that became the bucket that caught all the trimmings that were cut off the development table there. So what you see there is pretty much everything. Um, so sorry, kind of a short answer, but yeah, nothing didn't make it in there.
Okay, so I didn't finish it yet, but Secret Agent Clank, you also worked on that game. So what was your job exactly with that game? You did mention you were designing it before.
When we were working on Size Matters, that turned out to be a pretty good hit, and Sony was really happy with it. Um, High Impact Games was trying to explore some other relationships. I think one was with Xbox, and
Hmm.
they basically split off to do some prototypes for them to drum up more business because if you're working in games, you never want to only be reliant on one game sales to keep the company afloat. You want to diversify a bit. So with those guys splitting off, I inherited Secret Agent Clank and became lead designer on that and directing everything and everything from like helping write all the stories to um, doing some of the Cork opera in there, and then also just directing all the designers and the artists to some extent on there. I wasn't acting as an art director, but I got to tell them things like, "Oh, we need this for this attack," or
Hmm.
"This area should look like this because it's supposed to be Monte Carlo." Just a general overview direction kind of thing. And then kind of my main roles on there were, as usual, all the weapon design, all the weapon upgrade stuff, mods, um, a bunch of levels. I did the Baroness dancing level, the ski resort, the skiing down with the Yetis throwing boulders at you was also my levels, and all the vehicle based stuff. I'm trying to think what else. I think I did some more stuff on there. Cork Opera was also mine. Which funny story about that. because the team split off and we were crunching a lot on this. This is when High Impact Games went from being kind of a mild crunch house to like we were doing 7 days a week working on this
Mm.
project and late nights. Like it was a bit of a meat grinder there. So I got to direct a bunch of voice actors for this, including Jim Ward, who
Ooh.
was Quark, and we wrote up the script for him of the Quark opera, and we showed up to the VO section, and I thought Sony would have told him what the VO was going to be about. So when I showed up and we gave the script and we're like, okay, so Quark's singing this opera, and he goes, opera? No one told me anything about singing. And I was like, oh no, can this guy sing? Can he sing opera? Shit, this guy's like he's super expensive. Like I have worked with voice actors. I don't know what his rate, but I've worked with voice actors who make 10 grand an hour. Like it
Wow.
was, and you can't you don't truncate it. Like do you pay them for the full hour where they do it an hour or not? And I'm just like I'm flipping out. And Jim looks at the script and he's like, okay, no problem. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, I can do it. And the dude can sing opera, and he read he read and sang off the entire Quark opera perfectly in almost the first get go. I was just like, thank God this thing that fell between the cracks didn't just like totally blow up in our faces on this.
That's
He
actually
was a champ too.
incredible.
Yeah, he he finished the VO session early because he's that good. And then he's just like, hey, anybody want me to do like some of the voice answering on your phones? Like I'll do a message for you. Like, hey, this is Quark, leave a message. And everybody was like handing him their phones. And he was just doing that, just shooting the shit with us afterwards. It was a lot of fun. He was a neat dude.
That's genuinely incredible. Off the cup opera, no prep time. Just yeah, I could do it. It's
Yeah.
incredible.
He saved my ass. I was like, God dang it. Yeah, a lot of things are starting to fall between the cracks on Secret Agent Clank because of crunch and losing some key team members to go work on demos for Xbox. So
Mm.
that, but it happens. I mean, it was a necessary thing to try to keep Pig going for a while, but our game started to suffer because of that. That split off. Jack and Daxter Lost Frontier. That was a thing. That was one of the roughest dev cycles I had because of this.
Mm.
Because it just rolled from one long crunch into another. But overall, I'm happy that the games made it out and people seem to like them today. So they were not so well received back in the day, but people are looking at them with kinder eyes today, which is I appreciate.
So, how did you guys at High Impact Games sort of, or if it was Sony or Insomniac, come up with the concept of doing a game where you play only Clank and come up with this whole secret agent angle and theme with it, with a ton of like James Bond references and stuff?
Yeah, so Sony came to us with that idea. They had that little Secret Agent Clank TV show snippet in I
Mm-hmm.
forget which Ratchet and Clank it was. Was it
Up your
three?
arsenal, yeah.
Okay. And they said, "All right, we already made a Ratchet and Clank game. It did really well on PSP. Why don't we squeeze out a Clank game and see how that goes?" So they pitched it to us. High Impact Game, wanting money, said yes. So we decided to reuse the engine and then add Quark in there. But it's basically the size matters engine with Ratchet, the same models and all that type of stuff. We may have changed a couple things on Clank, gave some robots tuxedos to class it up a little bit for a spy game, and then I basically controlled all the sets and storyline, with asking from help from a couple of the other designers, and then Sony now and then for some of the more complicated writing. But I was a big James Bond fan, so I looked through all of that and Get Smart and all the classic spy type movies and TV shows and use those as a reference for all the enemies and the set pieces and everything in there. So it was a nod to a lot of the shows that I saw when I was growing up.
Just a specific question about, I guess, the story, since you said you worked on it. Ratchet in prison. Was that your idea? Did that come up early to sort of an excuse to get him away from Clank?
It wasn't specifically my idea. I think me working with Oliver Wade and a couple of the other designers were trying to figure out how to make Clank first and forefront in this, and that was the idea we came up with, was framing him and getting him in jail. But we didn't want to give up the Ratchet gameplay. He's popular, and B, we wanted to leverage some of that tech to fill out those important gameplay hours that we put on the game cover. So that is why we stuck him in prison. It I thought it worked out okay. We had some very interesting levels in there, and I will never diss the shower scenes, I thought that was one of the funniest things I'd done in that game. Uh, but yeah, it was a good way to keep Ratchet gameplay, but give Clank time to shine, and then also allow you to get weapons you can send to him in prison, hidden in cakes, which I also thought was kind of funny.
Mm.
And have that extra kind of arc where you can level up and power up weapons, though albeit somewhat slow in some circumstances, like the lacerator when I saw you playing. I was just like, why is this not leveling up? This seems like a bug.
Yeah, I did have some problems. I was redoing levels as Ratchet because I wanted to level up the things more, and it just wasn't happening. But overall, I do think the Ratchet parts are really creative to keep that gameplay and to sort of like have that arena style that has been in so many Ratchet and Clank games before, like Annihilation Nation and stuff, but have it in the guise of, oh, Ratchet's in prison, he's in different areas, gotta shoot his way to survive prison fights. It was I think it was really creative and good. So
yeah, it was a good filler. We were putting Clank in unique settings on every single place he was going, and that was really costly. So we needed a more contained thing to kind of fill out the overall gameplay. And building those little prison scenes was pretty quick and easy. So that was a good way to extend gameplay, and then save some resources we could spend on the more elaborate Clank and Cork areas. But in the end, I think we bit off a bit more than we could chew. I kind of feel like we should have cut Cork from the game and just focused on those two. And that also trying to handle all three of them, which Cork was actually Sony's request. I think spread us too thin on this project a little bit, and we didn't get to polish it as much as we should have.
I did actually. It's funny you mentioned that, like Cork, because I have noticed in some Sony games things like that appearing. There was a sort of, I don't know how actual public outcry it was, but I remember Tools of Destruction didn't have a lot of Quark in it. Neither did Quest for Booty, so to compensate, they put a lot of Quark into A Crack in Time. And something similar happened with, what's his name? Sully. In Uncharted 2, he was barely in it. So Uncharted 3, they shoved him in there as much as they could. So it's interesting they did something similar with Quark for requesting him so much for Secret Agent Clank.
It's I like Quark. He's a fun character, but he was a pain to make gameplay for. And cinematics.
I can very much see that. So how is it different from Size Matters? I did notice you said that there was a lot more crunch this time around making this one.
When you're crunching a lot, you're not sleeping very much, and you start to introduce more bugs than you're fixing. Sometimes a crunch or a push for a short period of time is helpful, but when you're doing it for a very long time, lots of things fall between the cracks. And we were doing all kinds of mistakes, especially like middle to the last part of this game. A good example is, I think in the economy we missed something, and one of the items you could get for free instead of actually having to spend money on it. And I forget which one it was, but that one's been called out a few times. It might have been like the Rhino, or so, like one of the major weapons was just like for zero bolts in the store or something crazy like that. But one example was like, I made the Tanglevine, which was one of my favorite weapons, and I totally forgot where I'm going to give that weapon or even train you up on it. So in a scramble, I'm trying to figure out like, where is Clank going to get this flower? And that's when I realized that the Jack of all trades had that carnation on his suit. So I had the animators do a scene where Jack of all trades literally steps in front of Clank when he's going after the big boss, bumps into him, and then that's where the flower drops, and then that's how I got the weapon to Clank. But we also didn't have much train up time, um, because we didn't really get this all planned out as much as I wanted to, and that's also why you immediately get like the handcuff um, bomb on the gondolas immediately after, which is something you would never do in a game like this. You got to give them a
Mm,
weapon,
yeah.
let them use it, get used to it, figure out the uses. Once they do that, after a couple of levels, then give them another weapon. And we were just like weapon, 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 because we didn't plan it right, and yeah, and crunch was definitely taking its toll. Like it was a scramble on this one.
So, after the release of Size Matters and Secret Agent Clank, how was the reception from like the general audience and critics, and how was the reaction from you and your team?
Yeah, I mean, after Size Matters, we were pretty excited about what we made. It was pretty well received for a non-Insomniac Ratchet and Clank game. And I always say, like, if Insomniac doesn't want to make that game because they don't want to work on PSP, then they don't get to complain about it. So, and we got an 85, which wasn't bad for for Ratchet and Clank Size Matters. And like I mentioned earlier, it sold over 1 million units. I actually think it might have been closer to two, which is huge for a PSP game. So Sony was happy, we were happy. Sony wanted to do more projects with us, and that's when Secret Agent Clank came around. And as we were just discussing, the team split off and was smaller. We were crunching like crazy to make up for the missing team members, and things were falling between the cracks. And as anybody knows, crunch will impact the quality of a game. And Secret Agent Clank ended up being a 75 overall score from what I've seen. And morale was generally, I think, pretty low at that point, because just a death march of a crunch like that will take the wind out of anybody. So I think a couple of team members left after that, and then we spun on to almost immediately onto Jack and Daxter Lost Frontier. But yeah, it's morale was starting to go down. We weren't too happy with Secret Agent Clank. I know Sony wasn't happy with it at that point, but the circumstances, I just don't know how it could have turned out any better unless we got more time or more team members at that point.
Hmm. So how is dealing with it now, 20 years later? You did mention people seem to view them more positively, or at least the people that enjoyed them more seem to be more vocal.
It's been interesting. So there's a couple of games I worked on that I just, when I finished them, I didn't want anybody to know that I even worked on them. I was just like, God, this thing is
Mm.
terrible, and I knew why it was terrible. There's lots of factors in there, um, but now that I'm seeing emulation, and it's funny with emulators, the graphics look good, the engines run better, and people playing these games are just like, hey, these are actually pretty good. And I see them streaming them, enjoying them, and I've actually started to fall back in love with some of the games I worked on, because I see what they should have turned out like,
Mm.
with proper graphic and engine support and things like that. They still have some design flaws in them, obviously, but I don't know if standards have lowered over time, and people are like, these aren't bad, or they're free on emulation, which makes it even better. I
Mm.
don't know what's going on, but the newer generations do seem to be looking at these with kinder eyes, and looking at games like Ratchet and Clank score being at 85, that ain't bad. That beats Concord and Dustburn. So take that. You want to spit in the face of Size Matters and Secret Agent Clank? Let's compare Metacritic scores from 20 years ago.
Personally, I enjoyed the games, and I would say most of the shortcomings, or at least the things I didn't like about them, if I had to pick things, I could chalk up to the limitations of the PSP. So I guess I wanted to ask, what did you think was the most challenging part of working with the PSP compared to other things that you've worked on, or just in those development cycles?
I wouldn't say it was all PSP limitations. There's definitely some game design flaws in these products. But yes,
Fair.
PSP did not make it easy. You know, everybody was rolling on to PS2 and they were super excited about it. You could push more graphics, you could build giant open seamless worlds. And then here we are working on the PSP, and we're basically doing PS1 graphics again and having those same kind of limitations where we have to count all the polys and control the camera angles so we don't render too much and the game crashes. Um, and then the controls on the PSP were also a very special challenge. I don't think we ever fully mastered with Size Matters and Secret Agent Clank. Like the camera drives me crazy. The fact I have to adjust that manually all the time.
Mm.
I was streaming that the other night, and I'm just like, how can anybody play this game? Because I'm in the middle of a pack of enemies, and I can't even rotate my camera and fire at the same time elegantly. And I was just dying over and over again. Like this is it, but it is what it is. Like people adapted to the platform, and for what it was, I think we did all right. But yeah, it's PSP was very challenging and just all the limitations. Fortunately, it had a UMD, like a little mini disc in it that we could have really good music on. Because when we were working on like N64 games, we had to make all the games MIDI music. So
Mm.
all that killer Vigilante 8 music we had to convert to MIDI and get special composers for that. But for this, we actually got some really banger tracks because of the technology of the PSP.
Awesome.
I
Upside,
think I
at
answered
least.
that question.
Yes, you did. You answered it spectacularly. What surprised you the most about the development? It could be good or bad, or maybe something that was really easy, or anything really.
Development is always full of surprises. Games are not standardized like other industries. Every single studio has different tech, different roles. Like a designer could mean one thing in one studio and a different thing in another studio. Different limitations of engines in there. So it's always a complete readjustment going from one studio to the next to figure out how they do it, why they do it, what is even possible in there. But as far as like size matters, it really surprised me how good and dedicated the team was. Like we I know I complain about crunch a lot, but we put in the hours at least on this one because we really wanted to and make a really good product. You know, as best as we could for what five insomniacs and the rest of the team being pretty green and
Mm.
new to the franchise, which is also why there's probably a lot of discrepancies between this game and regular Ratchet series because we didn't have any of the actual story writers
Mm.
from that series on here. We did have Oliver Wade, but he did a lot of the story, but he was also doing a lot of art, so he was doing a little bit of double duty there, and might have been overtasked. But yeah, I mean, and then just surprises are like finding out what can work on a system. If there's one thing I've always learned about games is whatever you think is hard is usually very easy, and whatever you think is easy turns out to be surprisingly hard.
Mm.
So I've always had to learn to really communicate with programmers to be like, "Hey, can this be done?" And then I would always get like a surprising answer of, "Oh yeah, that's super easy. I can do that in 5 minutes." Or, "No, this sounds really simple, but it's going to break everything and wipe out the game universe, and you won't have a job anymore." I'm lying about that last part, but but yeah, I mean, and then just the passion and the fun that we used to have over there was you know it was a really enjoyable experience at times, but a very trying one too, like any game development is.
If given the opportunity, would you want to work on another Ratchet and Clank game again, or any other IPs that you worked on in the past to get another shot at?
Yeah, I would love to work on a Ratchet and Clank game if I could do weapons. I really enjoy making
Ooh.
weapons. Um, and maybe a little bit of level design. Those are kind of my bread and butter of my career, especially in the early days. As far as like the other IPs, I really want to I would love to revisit V8 and make a modern version of it, kind of like what they did with the Unity version, that fan made one, and
Mm.
just go ham on it as far as like extra game modes and features and fix up a lot of stuff we didn't have time to do. He did some of that, but not as much as I want. I've already pinged Activision once and be like, "Hey, can I have my old license back?" And they just said no. I was like,
Oof.
"What are you going to do with it?" And they said nothing. I was like, "Why won't you let me do anything with it?" No. So I was like, "All right, I'll bug you again in a year. And we'll see what happens." But probably the one I really want to get my hands on again, besides that one, would be Twisted Metal Small Brawl. That was
Mm.
another really troubled dev cycle, but not because of crunch. It was a bunch of other weird circumstances. And that's turning out to, I'm finding a huge fan base around that. And by huge, I mean like 500 people. But big enough that I stream it and talk about it. But I would love to redo that one because that one was supposed to be on the PS2 engine with a lot extra bells and whistles. But unfortunately, during development, Sony decided to push it back to PS1, and it caused a lot of issues. So
Mm.
I have I have some unresolved desires to fix that that game.
Probably the most important question I'm going to ask today. How long have you been a fan of VTubers?
Wait, what's a VTuber? What? You're not a real cartoon cat lady bug thing? I've been lied to this entire interview.
Oh, is it hot in here? Oh, this is awkward.
uh, I pop in on almost anybody who's been playing my games on Twitch, and
Mm.
I've run into a couple other VTubers that I've chatted with when they've been playing my games, and when I saw you playing my game, I decided to watch for a bit and was pretty impressed with your knowledge of Ratchet and Clank universe. You know more than you should. I dream of knowing that much about a made up universe about a cat person with guns. Uh, so no, I mean I became a fan because you were such a fan of these type of games, and we're giving it exposure. So I now follow you.
Aw, thank you. Yeah, that's how we met. I was just playing the game, and he popped in just like, yeah, I was one of the devs, and I was like, I don't believe you.
I get that a lot.
This is a random Twitch chatter.
I popped into a Small Brawl YouTube comment section and mentioned that, like, oh yeah, I worked on this thing, and I got vitriol. It was this. Someone was so upset that I said this. They're just all caps going, you didn't work on this game. This game is the love of my life. You are a phony. I'm paraphrasing here.
You're a phony.
It's just like, wow, okay. I'm not gonna talk about all the cut content then. You can go down rocks, dude.
It is great. It's only happened to me a couple times, but streaming a game with like a developer in the Twitch chat to give you all of the knowledge and stuff. It was really exciting. Yeah, it was fun. That's why I was like, you know what? I want to interview that guy. He's pretty cool, and I'm glad I did. This was really fun. That sounds like the ending. We're not ending yet, but I just mentioned this was really fun. What kind of games have you been playing, and is there anything you are looking forward to in the gaming sphere?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned I've been playing a lot of my old games and streaming those and just chatting about them so I can kind of have an archive of all the knowledge before I get too old and senile. And all that knowledge is gone because most of it is just in my head, and then the notes I have all over the bookshelves over here of old game design documents. And people seem to be enjoying that. And then I saw a game that I'm really excited to play, and I'm hoping to pick it up today, called Concord. So I'm gonna jump in there and get some PvP matches. So I'm pretty. Wait, you snickered.
No, because I've just also heard of that game. I just picked it up at GameStop, so we could like do collabs on Concord together. I think that'd be really fun.
Oh, fantastic. Actually, let's see how much it is right now.
That's yeah, on GameStop. It'd be funny if they were still selling it at GameStop.
They pulled it off. The network's down.
Yeah, they pulled it off. They really pulled off a great Overwatch clone. Yeah, they did it.
Oh my god. I can't play this game now. I was so excited for it. No, but seriously, Astrobot is caught my attention. It seems to be a really fun
Yeah.
return to form type game, and I hear you can play it in like less than 40 hours as opposed to these mega games that you're now buying where it's just like 800 hours of game time. And I'm like, I don't have time for that. I also don't want to
Unfortunately,
pay
yeah.
$120 for that either. So it's give me a small bite-sized gameplay experience where I can feel accomplished on
Yeah.
it. So I'm excited for that one. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's coming up. What about you? Have anything on your radar?
Astro Boy wasn't. But then I saw the reviews and everyone just genuinely having a good time, so it looks like a good time I might. Supermarket Simulator Together, I think it's called. It's just the supermarket sim game, but up to 16 people. So I'm kind of really excited to bring a whole bunch of people to play that. There's
That
this
sounds good.
there's this really silly office game I've been seeing some VTubers play, and it seems like it's an Among Us type game, but like I'm kind of interested in seeing if I could do like an office role play. I think that'd be a funny event to do,
Hmm.
where it's like all the people playing different characters, like it's literally on The Office, and seeing if it's funny or whatever. I don't know. What else is coming out? I was supposed to play Rebirth. I haven't gotten to that yet. Final
Sounds like
Fantasy
you like a
7.
lot of the co-op play with your audience type games.
I do. I do. I think that or story games mostly, I think.
Okay.
So either that or the exact opposite. No niches here, just a jack of all trades.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wish I had more spare time. I work a lot and I commute a lot being that it is LA. So when I get home, it is nothing short of a miracle if I can get in a 2 to 3 hour stream and then that's it. And then basically from my audience, people just want to see me play my games. I've had
mhm.
requests for other games, but I don't see the point in it. I haven't even gotten through, gosh, one, two, three, like five of my games. I got like another 20 to go that I've made. So it's going to be a long grind for me.
There's a new Legend of Zelda game. Also, it's single player, but you play as Zelda and you just like you make stuff. That looked fun. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get to that, but that was cool. And then GTA 6, I'm probably gonna play. Of course,
Yep.
everyone and their mom's gonna play that one.
That thing will break the world when it comes out.
Oh yeah,
It'll sell more than the GDP of the US.
probably. Roxy's gonna be a small country after the profits of that one.
They're just going to break off from, where are they? California. They're just going to break off from California and float out in the sea and have their own island nation.
Oh my god.
But I have a huge backlog of games. Like
Yeah.
I have a terrible problem of buying Steam games when they're on sale, and I think I have like 400 Steam games. I've played like 10 of them. And I've got a giant wall of PS1, PS2, all the way up through 5 games, all on the. So whenever you see me glance up here, it is bookshelves full of games over here.
I literally have the same thing. I just hooked up my PS3 to play the Ratchet and Clank games after, and now I'm looking at my library just like, wow, if I had the time. And I'm a full-time streamer, by the way, and I'm still trying to find time to play video games. I'd love to go back to my old
Yeah.
favorites and revisit them and give insightful commentary or whatever.
It's interesting. We've been doing a lot of research lately, and it turns out that everybody's going back to the old games, that they're not buying much of the new stuff.
Mm.
And that's starting to pop off. So playing older games on stream seems like a good idea right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm playing Paper Mario: Thousand Year Door as well, with some mods and stuff, and that's doing pretty well. So I think I would also kind of say the same. What type of stuff are you working on now?
That's a good question. I'm going to keep it secret.
Ooh.
I will say, I know, NDAs and stuff. Uh, I'm still making games. I'm making much shorter experiences, but I'm doing it for a tech avatar company. And that is all I will say for right now.
As a VTuber, tech avatar sounds really interesting. So, if people are interested in watching your streams or following you on any future projects, where can they go to find you?
You can find me at Goodrich Games, and I'm sure we can link it in the vid when you're done with it. But yeah, you can find me there. feel free to come and chat. I usually answer questions if my brain can handle playing a game and talking at the same time, which is a 50-50 shot.
Awesome. And is there any last things you want to say before we close out this interview?
I don't think so. This is pretty comprehensive. You put together a pretty good list of questions. I am surprised how long we've been going, but I think this will make a pretty good video.
Thank you. I hope so too. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. It's my first time doing this, so I appreciate that. And yeah, thanks for coming out and helping me and answering all of my invasive questions and bringing up your past. It's been amazing.
Yeah, thanks. This was fun. And if you ever enjoy one of my other games, maybe we'll do this again.
Hell yeah. I did have that thought with Secret Agent Clank and Last Frontier to do those, to maybe do split up into 2 interviews, but we shall see what the future holds. I don't know what I'm going to do with this thing, but this is definitely the type of thing I want to be doing more, like more event, interview, interesting content like this. So
I want to see you finish Clank. That's your homework assignment.
Woo! Hopefully, oh no, next week I'm doing something. Hopefully at some point, yeah, in the future, it'll be there. I did not write an outro, but thank you, Goodrich Games, for getting deep with me, Lorian Loc. Socials. The
Thank God my wife doesn't watch my shit.
I only realized as I said it, I did not tell you what the name of this was going to be because I just wrote it down quickly. Thank you everyone for watching. If you like this content, stayed in the end, please comment below what you thought of it. If you thought it was good, too long, any questions I should ask. I don't know. It's my first time doing this, so any feedback is appreciated. If you want to see me improve and see more content like that, please just let me know. And yeah, you know where to find Goodrich, you know where to find me. Thank you all for watching so much, and I will catch you guys next time. Bye-bye.